Good morning, everyone. This is the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society Science Chat, and today is June 1st, 2019. So today, Bill Lucas has offered to give the presentation on the electrodynamic nature of life. So, this should be interesting. This is like part of a series of talks that Bill gives around the world, right, Bill?
Yes, I've done it in even in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and also in Washington State, and in Canada, and in Electric Universe invited me to do a presentation. So there's a number of groups that have a vested interest in it, and been involved since it involves electrodynamics. Been involved in developing of instrumentation to measure the unusual electromagnetic field called the longitudinal field, and there's a lot of history in the field of medicine related to this. And our Food and Drug Administration denies it all and says doctors, if they use this, they lose their license to practice medicine. Because there was a doctor in France during World War II named Anton Priore, and he showed how to cure 92 diseases with no pharmaceuticals, no medical doctor required, just a technician to radiate your body with the longitudinal radiation, and you would get well. And the president of France had his wife terminally ill with cancer, and he went to this doctor and got his wife radiated, and she got well. And then he revealed that to all the major newspapers in Europe and the European Union, and he had the French government give a grant of millions of dollars to the doctor, Anton Priore, who did that, to start doing people. He was really a veterinarian, and so he started radiating people, and then that he was doing thousands of people a week with terminal type diseases, and they were getting well, and the people in the medical profession, pharmaceutical businesses said, oh, this can ruin our business. And so we don't know officially if they did it, but it looks like they hired the mafia to exterminate this doctor and everyone who ever worked at his laboratory, and all of that, so they could get rid of, wipe out this this type of procedure to get people well. And the French government was not able to determine who paid the mafia, but they did get the people who did the murdering, and they put them in prison. And so that's an interesting story in itself, but I'm not going to be covering that too much today. Okay, how do I advance it? Oh, here we go. I can just go to the next slide. Are we ready to start? Okay,
We are ready to start.
I got 42. How do I get down to 1? I'm trying to get to, I can't get to the next one. Maybe you can you go advance to the next slide? You can see on the screen it says it's number 1 of 42. Well, this is not the, well, maybe that's okay. Okay, I'll go ahead and do it the best I can.
You're on slide 2 now.
Okay, I'm on slide 2 from your perspective. Okay, all right, thanks. This is a picture of the pulses of life that we can measure by putting sensors around the head. And we can see everything that's going on in the brain, and we can see all kinds of communication waves, and you can see some of them shown on the right here. And for instance, if you have this on and you're calm, and sitting there, and then someone comes in and speaks to you, and you speak, as soon as you do that, you'll see changes in these waves. And if someone hits you on the hand or something, or touches you, you'll see a sensation, because all of that is communicated electronically. And so we see a lot of electrical things in these pulses that we can sense with various types of sensors in the brain. And so if we look at the human nervous system, I guess you can't see my cursor. Can I make my cursor so you can see it?
There is like a red laser pointer on the left-hand side of the set of controls.
Okay, now can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, here are the two sides of the brain, and the two sides of the brain are connected to all the different organs, including your eyes and stuff like that, in the body. And so there's communication, and there's various hormones and chemicals that are released by these communication processes to handle things like digestion, and if you get hurt or cut or something, and then the body starts to bleed, and different things will come and help to get it to stop bleeding, and eventually it'll heal itself. And all that communication is done from the various parts of the brain through the nervous system. But there is more than that in the Bible. I mean, not in the Bible, in the body. These are, now I'm showing pictures of neurons. Neurons are parts of the nervous system. I've compared it here to a plasma sphere, and you can see something that looks a lot like a neuron, and it's a we also see this same type of structure in space on a gigantic scale, not just in microscopic scale inside the body. So one of the things that is significant that we want to cover is in the work that I've done in electrodynamics, by using all 6 of the empirical equations of electrodynamics, this Gauss's electrostatic magnetostatic law, Ampere's law, Faraday's law, Lenz's law, and Lorentz's law. By using all 6 of those, I get a solution for electrodynamics that seems to replace most of modern science. For instance, the results of special relativity that have been added to the abbreviated version of electrodynamics by Oliver Heaviside, that is all a part that comes out naturally from Lenz's law, as it's used in combination with the others. So what we see is special relativity is no longer a separate theory. It is just a part of electrodynamics, and the assumptions of special relativity are known to be false, and we had changed the scientific method so that you don't falsify a theory by falsifying an assumption. That's called the existential scientific method. And so they did that to protect theories like special relativity and general relativity. And in general relativity, when it couldn't predict the gravitational field of our solar system or of stars or galaxies, what did they do? Did they falsify it? No. They invented dark matter and dark energy. Well, how much dark matter and dark energy was there? Oh, 94% of all the universe, and 6% is regular matter and regular energy. Well, I call that a fudge factor, and that's pretty big. It's 24 times as big as the theory of general relativity. So you're making theories up to do that. But anyway, when we look at the at the structure of the neurons in the body, we see a lot of electrodynamic things, and we see structures that we also see on an astronomical scale. And so if the universe is truly just electromagnetic, and that's the universal force, then structures should be similar on all size scales, because there's no other type of thing that can happen except for electrodynamics. So anyway, that is an interesting thing. And so what happened to me in my research was when I realized I think I've got the universal force, because I was able to derive a better version of gravity than any previous theory, and could explain all the stuff for which they had to invent dark matter and dark energy just directly from electrodynamic version of gravity. And so then the NIST measured the masses of the nuclear isotopes, 3,500 of them, to 8 significant figures. Before that, they'd only been measured to 4 significant figures. And so we had the idea that there were neutrons and protons in the nucleus, and there was a strong interaction holding them together, and there was a weak interaction governing the decay of the nucleus. And but when we started examining the data to 8 significant figures, we discovered there's no evidence for these things. That those ideas we had were able to predict some data, but they don't agree with conservation of energy. They don't agree with a lot of things that we think are fundamental in science. And so that encouraged me, because that meant that of the so-called 4 fundamental forces, gravity, electrodynamics, strong interaction, weak interaction, strong interaction, weak interaction don't exist. The force of gravity would have derived that from electrodynamics. So it looks like everything is electrodynamic in nature. So that means that life should be electrodynamic in nature. And so this presentation is going to be looking into that. What you find in various cultures, and particularly in Asia and the Middle East, you find that they have ideas of various meridians which are electrodynamic in the body, but these are not the nervous system. These are a separate path in the body, and we can measure it. And you've probably heard of people doing acupuncture, and what they do is they interfere with the flow of information electrically in these things, and they can cause you not to feel pain. They can do a lot of different things in the body. So it turns out that for acupuncture, there are a number of places on the body that have over time been identified. For instance, on the feet that are shown here, you'll see different colored spots. And like if you look on the bottom right-hand side here, it says knee, and this little spot here. And if you put a needle in there, it will affect your knee. And then you've got one up here for the shoulder, and you've got one here for the ear and the eye, and you've got one over here for the nose, and all of these points are connected to that particular part of the foot, and signals are going back and forth. And so if you hurt your foot, you can have an effect on some other part of your body that you wouldn't think would be related to. And so anyway, this is not a fable. The United Nations recognizes all of these as valid medicine, even though in the United States, our Food and Drug Administration does not recognize that. But most of the world does. and they have been successful using this for some time. And so here are acupuncture points on the ear, and you can see like this one here goes to the ankle, this one goes to the toes, this one goes to the knee, this goes to the hip, this goes to your fingers, this one down here on the bottom goes to your eye and your face, and just all these different places are connected, but it's not connected by nerves, it's connected by other mechanisms, but they're electrodynamic in nature. And of course, here's your hand, and here's again the various acupuncture points that are in the hand. And so we have a lot of evidence. We've been using it medically for a long time, maybe thousands of years, and people in some parts of the world know how to use that very effectively. And then here's a bunch of acupuncture points for the whole body, as you can see. Okay. Now, I want to talk about a doctor named Robert Becker. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was a medical doctor practicing in, I think, Pennsylvania. And he wrote this book, The Body Electric, which was the bestseller for 5 years in the medical practice on the New York Times list. So, and what he did was he found that certain animals, like a lizard, you can cut the leg off of a lizard and it will grow it back by itself. You don't have to give it any medicine. And he was very curious. If I cut one off that's an irregular leg, let's say it had one more toe on it than the other one, if I cut it off, but the one on the other side had, had the full amount of toes. If I cut it off and it grows back the same identical one I cut off, which was irregular, not the standard one that should have been there. And so he was working for the Veterans Administration and in this hospital, and he had the idea, if I could get the right kind of electric signals to come down the leg of, let's say, a person who was injured in the military in a battle, and he lost a part of his leg or all of his leg, I could get it to grow back. And so he studied the signals all around the leg of the lizard here, and he got certain types of information out of it, and he made an electrical device that would go on the leg of a wounded soldier, and he was able to create what are called blastous cells, which are cells that have not identified themselves by type, that haven't specialized yet. He was able to create those and then regrow a leg. And so he started doing veterans who had these type of injuries. And when the veterans found out that it worked, oh man, they all wanted to go to this hospital in Pennsylvania and get treated. And when the medical profession realized what was going on, they went to the head of the Veterans Administration and said, we don't want that. Stop all that work. Don't let him do any more work. Don't let him do any more research. Don't let him treat any more patients. Well, they took all the money away from the hospital that had been supporting this man, Robert Becker. But the demand was so great on the Veterans Administration that the head of the Veterans Administration found other sources of money and fed it in so they could continue doing veterans. And when the when the medical people figured out what had happened, they got him fired. And so this made a lot of news. It's in the New York Times, many newspapers, and stuff like that. But the thing is, he had discovered how to use some electrical signals to have the body change its defined cells into a more universal cell that hadn't specialized yet. And then that could grow following the pattern being communicated to it through the other parts of the body and from the brain. So that was what was going on there. And but he was really opposed because it was going to hurt the medical profession and the pharmaceutical industry. He also wrote another book called Cross Currents, and here he was talking about how we are injuring ourselves by all the electromagnetic fields we're exposing our body to. And he studied what these effects were. So one of the things he studied was people who got certain types of medical problems. They wanted to know how close they lived to these high voltage power lines. And they found that people that lived within a few hundred feet of the high voltage power lines got certain medical problems much higher than the rest of society. And so those power lines were being putting out electrical signals and fields that were affecting the health of people. Now, most of us don't live next to those power lines, hopefully, so we don't have that experience, but we unfortunately have developed cell phones. And cell phones put out a lot of signals. And where do we put the cell phone when we're talking on it? Next to our brain, on our ear. And that is causing things. And the new generation, next generation of cell phones, called the G5, will have 1,000 times as much electrical signals coming out as the G4. And with this G5, I don't know if you've seen, they're not for sale yet, as far as I know, but the G5 can download a whole movie in less than 10 seconds. It does everything 1,000 times faster than our current G4 cell phones. And so people want it. They're putting up satellites for them so you can use it all over the earth. And it's a big deal. A lot of money in the stock market's being invested in this technology. So he published a book some time ago on the perils of that. Now, if you look at a brain cell, you see it has what's called cilia. These are cilia here. They're coming out of this brain cell. And they act like an antenna. And they respond to other brain cells, and they coordinate the creation of new brain cells, and they control a lot of things going on in the body. And a lot of research has been done, many thousands of papers published in the medical field on this. And then it turns out that there are what are called fast transport proteins. That's what these blue things are here. And they have on them a little primary cilia. You see these on the different ones? You can see them over here and here and here. And these transport proteins go out from a cell into the bloodstream and pick up something that the cell needs and brings it back into the cell. And these little cilia are used like a GPS. And under the microscope, you can see all this stuff. if you have the right kind of microscope and you know how to set it up. And you can see them go out and get some stuff from the blood that is coming from your digestive system, and then they bring it into the cell. And so, you know, that's all electrical. It's, as I say, it's like a GPS, and you can see they know how to get back to where they started from. Even though they went out some distance in the bloodstream and they have to go against the current of the bloodstream, they still can get back. And it's amazing. I mean, people just look at that and they say, I don't understand what's happening. How can it do that? And but they do. And we see that electrical property. And this is looking at one of those things more closely. You can see it has multiple cilia. And then if you look under a microscope, you can see you cut it in half and look at the interior structure. You can see a lot of structures here. And these things are enabling the cilia to perform various functions. And we don't know as much as we'd like to know about these things, but we can observe and we see a lot of things that are necessary for life, and they're all electrically controlled by these different parts of the body. And here's another picture of the cross-section of what we see with the microscope. And you see these little microtubules and these plasma membranes, and it's elaborate structure inside. And you say, oh, well, why do I have all of these? Why are they arranged geometrically like this? And it's all determined electrically. Okay, so now we want to talk about the origin of life. I mean, we've got a universal force. Maybe we can learn something about the origin of life. We've done experiments on what we call abiogenesis. And the origin of life comes from inorganic matter from the formation of the Earth from a star. And it's using thermodynamic processes and natural chemical processes, but no electrical processes. Although you could say that forming compounds, chemical compounds, would be electrical somewhat. And then we want to form, from this approach, abiogenesis, we want to say organic molecules are formed by natural chemical processes. We want to say that they reproduce themselves by spontaneous generation, and thermodynamics causes certain changes to occur, cause things to grow old and die, and that sort of thing. So here is an experiment by Miller and Urey, and they wanted to use sparks up here. They have an atmosphere that they chose so that it had various gases in it, and they have these sparks cause these gases to come apart slightly and then go back together and form more complicated molecules. They have down here in the bottom a trap to keep these from being destroyed by going back up around the whole circuit and forming and being destroyed through the spark. The spark not only creates it, but it can destroy it. So they wanted to accumulate some. So anyway, in the universal electromagnetic force law that is derived from the 6 empirical equations of electrodynamics, there is 2 types of symmetry. There's spherical symmetry and chiral symmetry. But chiral symmetry is very important for molecules. And what we find when we examine these things that they created, which look like precursors to more complicated organic molecules, is we find that they do not have chiral symmetry. They're not all left-handed or right-handed symmetry. There's an even mixture. And when we first started making pharmaceuticals in a chemical factory, we found that we made equal amounts of left and right-handed symmetry things, and that when you made a medicine out of that and you gave it to a person, there were side effects due to the fact that the body was only looking for one particular symmetry, and they were providing two, and the second one caused problems. And so eventually they got taken to court and had to pay out huge amounts of money to the people who had bought some of these medicines they'd made that had the wrong chiral symmetry, or had half of it was the wrong chiral symmetry. And so we've learned a lot about that over time. And also, I'm going to show you a device that can measure life energy. If you take that and use it on this type of apparatus, you'll discover there's no life energy there. But anyway, that's just some of the things that we have discovered. This is the universal force law from the 6 empirical equations. This is the potential for it, and then down below, this is the all the terms in the force law. And notice there's 1 minus v squared over c squared sine squared theta type terms. Like, they look very similar to what you get from special relativity, and but they don't come from special relativity in this theory. They come from Lenz's law. So we see that. Now, we have been able to derive the force of gravity from electrodynamics, and it's better than any previous force of gravity in that it can explain the gravitational field as we go out far from our sun. Pioneer 10 and 11 measured that very precisely. We also find it can predict the velocity of the outer spiral arms of spiral galaxies, which the previous theories of gravity could not do, but this one can find. But then we found there was a quantization of gravity called Bode's law, and the electrodynamic theory of gravity can predict this type of data. And here you see a rough, crude diagram. The sun, we start at 0 here, and then you have Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, Neptune, and Pluto. And you can see that they're all roughly predicted, and the period that they have is just equal to the period of the sun and its rotation times the what do you call it, semi-major axis of the orbit, and so that all is very interesting that you can predict that. So the question is, well, how does it get arranged in such a systematic way? And you've got the force of gravity, but we know in our solar system that we have more than just the force of gravity. We have what we call electromagnetic forces. We have all kinds of charges coming down to the North and South Pole. We have lightning. We can see the lightning going all the way back to the sun. And we have all kinds of things going on, and they're all affecting it. So if we have the complete universal force that's electromagnetic, we should be able to put it all together and make this prediction. And I'm currently working on papers to do that. Now, if I look at the orbits, let's say I'm looking at the orbit of Jupiter, and Jupiter here is this main line right here, and then I've got the planets of Jupiter, and they go around the orbit of Jupiter, just like our moon goes around the Earth as the Earth goes around the sun, and they look almost identical to organic molecules, complex organic molecules, and we see the chiral symmetry there. We see all kinds of things that are coming from electrodynamics, and so we think we're getting a a better handle on that. But here is an organic molecule, DNA, and it looks very similar. There's all kinds of things spiraling around a central core. And so now light is just what we're seeing on the astronomical scale on the microscopic scale. And so we should be able to do something about that. If I look at the DNA directly using special types of microscopes and using a computer to help simulate the symmetry of what we're seeing, we see that all of these organic molecules have chiral symmetry, and that chiral symmetry is associated with prime numbers like 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, that kind of symmetry. And so we see that, and that symmetry is amazing, but we know it's a structure that's being held together. And your theory of the atom has got to be able to explain how they can combine in this symmetry. So you have to have something. If you have electrons orbiting the nucleus of an atom, you can't maintain a structure like that. You have to have it more stable in cells or shells. And they can vibrate a little bit, but they can't orbit. And so what we found in working with the theory of the atom is the current theory of the atom that we teach in school with the electron orbiting has only a small fraction of all of the emission spectral lines. It can only predict a small fraction of the emission spectral lines of the atoms. And we didn't realize that until we went out in space, where we could get the spectral lines from hydrogen and helium without having to go through a glass container. And when we did that, we saw all these lines in the extreme ultraviolet spectrum. And so that was the first clue that our theories of the atom were inadequate. And but using the toroidal ring model of the electron, we were able to show that all the things that we had used orbits for before were actually built into the electron itself, and they were the wavelengths around the toroidal ring, not the orbit of the electron around the nucleus. And so these toroidal rings form geometrical structures. Okay, here is a picture of the DNA molecule, and you can see certain groups called phosphate groups and different kinds of groups, and they form spiraling arms that make up the DNA molecule. And there's always, this has 5. You never find one with 4. You never find one with 6. They always are this structure with chiral symmetry, which is a property of the electromagnetic porcelain. And here's a picture of collagen. You can see here there's 3. And so we've got DNA, we've got protein collagen, we've got starches, and starches here have just a single spiral, or sometimes one spiral will be connected in an odd way to another spiral, but they don't spiral around one another with 2. And so anyway, we see that sort of thing in molecules. And here's carbohydrate glycogen, and then here's a single spiral. This is spirilla and spirochete. These are bacteria, and you can see how they have a single spiral, which has chiral symmetry. I can't make this do it, but this, on the original one, this wave on top is a transverse wave, and the wave on the bottom is a longitudinal wave, and I actually show how the motion works with them. And that longitudinal wave vibration, since the molecules in the body, organic molecules, are longitudinal shape, they do only the vibration they do is primarily longitudinal. Now, a little bit of the history of the use of electrodynamics in medicine. This is a picture of Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich worked with Freud in Europe, and Wilhelm Reich was interested in using electrodynamics to help people out medically with all kinds of problems, some of them mental problems and other types of problems. And he was working in Freud's hospitals, I guess you would say. And Freud did not like it because he was more successful than Freud. So Freud told him, you got to leave. Go to America. Don't come back. And so he went to Boston. And while he was in Boston, he developed the first life energy detector. And this is a picture of it here. And this is a schematic. It's a giant capacitor, a light bulb, and I think this is a meter, and over here is a coil. And so what appears to happen is the longitudinal waves from living things that, when it decays, they have given off. They go inside this and charge this capacitor up, and that will turn the light bulb on. And so when a person walks in the room and gets close to this detector, the light bulb comes on. And then if a small animal comes in, it has to get a little closer because it knows how much life energy it's giving off. But it will work on animals as well as people. And so Wilhelm Reich was demonstrating this and using it to treat patients in Boston. And he published papers on it and everything, but the medical profession did not like this. They did not want to use electrodynamics. So they fought him tooth and nail. He was able to take pictures of the life energy coming off of plant leaves and things like that. And so here's what some people would call an aura coming off the plant leaf. You can see all the veins and you can see the edges of the plant leaf. And that's longitudinal energy coming off of the plant. Then I was involved with some people, and they said, well, that's awful big, that device that he made. Maybe we could use modern technology and shrink it down. And so we were able to develop this, what's called experimental life energy meter. This is the model LM3, and this is out of date now. But anyway, this is the sensor right here. This is the sensitivity that you can set, and this is can go out to a different sensor. This thing is plugged in right here. And so anyway, if I have this turned on and set up at a reasonable sensitivity, I can bring my hand up close to this but not touch it, and I can see the meter reading go up. And here there's no standardization, so you can set the sensitivity to wherever you want within the range of your electrons. And so we were able to do that. Here is an experiment we performed. We pulled 2 leaves off of a plant, and there it is. Well, it's actually just 1 leaf here. You can see there's a piece of tape here. It's fastened to this. And that's the detector that's plugged into the back of the meter. And when we put this over close to the detector, we read something. but when it's 3 or 4 inches away, we don't read anything. Now, if we continue to watch it over time, this is a reading. It goes down because that green leaf turns brown and dies. And so we can see it dying. And we just have to leave there, and you can, it's continuous. You can, instead of taking a reading every once a day, you can take it every 5 minutes or whatever, and you can get more detail to it. But anyway, that's what you see. We can now do the same thing with a culture of yeast. And what we do is we put the yeast in something that's food for it, and it grows, and more life energy occurs. And then when it uses up all of its food, it collapses down and dies. And we can see that in an order of minutes, or hours. You don't have to wait days like you're doing with the leaf. Now, we use this meter in hospitals, particularly in Washington State, where I guess Franklin could find a hospital where they use that meter you saw there. What they have done in Washington State is hospitals have taken patients with tumors and infectious diseases and have measured their life energy reading. And they discover that it's lower than the life energy reading of well people. They have also found that they have measured the life energy reading of various foods. And some foods have a higher life energy rating than others. And in hospitals, what they have done is they have divided their food service into 2 parts. One part has the highest life energy readings, and the other is the lower half of the life energy readings. And they let the patients choose whichever one they want. But they keep a record of how they do in the hospital. And they found that sick patients get well faster eating food with high life energy readings. And of course, if you go to a farmer's market, what do you demonstrate there? You take the same fruit or vegetable from the grocery store that's not organic, and you compare the one that the farmers have raised, which is organic, at the farmer's market. And you read the life energy from both, and you see that the organically raised farmer's one has a higher life energy than the other one, which has a reading that is closer to what the patients that have tumors and infectious diseases have. And you ask the question, or you present the question at the farmer's market, what do you think will happen if you eat these processed foods that have a lower life energy rating than the normal food, and fruits and vegetables? And the answer is, you get sick with all kinds of diseases because you didn't have the right amount of life energy. Now, here is a picture of Anton Priore in the white jacket. I think the man next to him is either the president of France or he is the head of the medical profession organization in the country of France. And this fellow, Anton Priore, was in medical school when World War II started. And he was drafted from medical school and assigned to a radar unit. And at the radar unit that he was assigned to, I don't think I have a picture of this. No. At the radar unit he was assigned to, the way people got food during World War II in the military was it was brought to them in bushel baskets of fruits and vegetables and other things. And they happened to put that at the base of the radar unit. And he was curious to notice that the stuff they didn't eat, because people didn't like a certain fruit or vegetable, did not go bad, even though it was there for weeks or months. And one day he walked to another unit that was an army unit and to visit someone there. And while he was there, he happened to look at their bushel baskets of food, and they were all going bad if it was something that people didn't like to eat. And like he expected it from having grown up in a family where they went to the market and got their food. And he told the people there who were in charge, he says, well, you should get your food from the same place we get ours because ours doesn't go bad. And they said, don't you know? We both get our food from the same place. Your radar unit and our army unit, we get our food from the same place. And he said, oh. So when he got back, he asked his commanding officer if he could perform an experiment. He wanted to move the bushel baskets away from the base of the radar unit about 100 yards to see what would happen. And he got permission as long as it didn't destroy the food. Well, after a while, the food started going bad, as he expected it would, and so he was told to move it back. And but he had confirmed that something coming off of the radar unit was causing the fruits and vegetables to not decay, and kind of like recharging their batteries or their cells with energy. And so after the war was over, he finished medical school, became a veterinarian, and he bought a surplus radar antenna and hired some electrical engineers and asked them if they could find out what was going on, what kind of radiation was coming off this radar antenna. Well, they tested it, and they said to him, most of the energy coming off of this antenna is transverse radiation, and that's what the radar system uses. But a small amount of energy is longitudinal radiation coming off of it. And they told him that if he was interested in doing experiments and things, that they knew how to build a bigger source of light, which you see here. This is in a 2-story building that they built for him, and they built this apparatus so that he could radiate animals and other things with it. And he had the idea that if this longitudinal radiation could cause a plant or a piece of fruit or a piece of or vegetable to live longer, that somehow it was recharging the cells, and that if he radiated them with this energy, they would last longer. Well, he radiated food, vegetables first, and it worked the same as the radar unit did, but it would work faster and from a longer distance. Then he told the electrical engineers, he said, I think this might work on animals who are sick. Just like when fruit is starting to decay, it's sick. If an animal is sick and I radiate it, maybe it'll get well. And the people who made the unit for him said, well, I think you might need a frequency dependence, and we'll build that in, and they did. And then they helped him radiate animals, and they were able to find a frequency for longitudinal radiation that would work for 92 diseases that animals got. And they were radiating them. They got the prize pets, the prize farm animals all over Europe. He was becoming very well known. And then, of course, the president of France, who had known him during the war, his wife got cancer, and he came to him and said, would you use this apparatus to radiate my wife? But she has cancer, and that's one of the diseases that you can cure in animals with this radiation. And Anton Priore said, well, you know, I only have a license to do animals. And they said, the president said, no problem, I'll bring you a license to do people tomorrow. And he brought the license and his wife, and with this apparatus, he radiated her once, and she got well from being terminally ill. She had had radical surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, immunotherapy. Nothing was helping her but radiating one time with this, she don't know. And he broadcast all over Europe what was happening, and he gave a grant to this man, to Anton Priore, to start doing people, millions of dollars grant. And he was doing thousands of people a week. And then somebody paid the mafia to come and wipe him out because they didn't want that solution to help. They didn't want a tool like that. But if you ever saw the movie Star Wars, you'll find that it was a science fiction movie, and they tried to show off things that represented things in the future. So they had something called the communicator that they used in the movie. But in the days they made the movie, there were no cell phones. Now there are. Well, they also showed a device that would put out supposedly longitudinal radiation, and it was about the same size as the communicator and looked like a flashlight, in the movie at least. And people got well, and if they were injured, they would recover from the injury. And today, the Chinese are making a laser, which is transverse radiation, and they have found a way to put a crystal, certain type of crystal, and run the laser beam through it, and it converts it from transverse to longitudinal radiation. And all the medical establishments in the world are concerned. They don't want to allow this into their countries. They don't want people to be able to do what Anton Priore did, because they will hurt their medical field and their income and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's what's coming. Okay. From the work that Anton Priore did, we see that the pulse of life is the longitudinal electrodynamic pulse in organic molecules. And these organic molecules consist of a prime number of chiral fibers composed of stacked ring structures. The organic molecules vibrate longitudinally like a long spring, making them alive or pulsating. The organic molecule vibrations slowly die by decay, giving off longitudinal radiation according to the second law of thermodynamics. Consumption of food by organisms and animals brings in a fresh supply of longitudinal radiation from the food. So that's how you get it into the molecules of the body, is through the food. It's a non-equilibrium system. If you don't bring it in, the body will die. If you keep bringing it in on a regular basis, the body will live longer, but it still ages over time. Okay, so a summary of the electrodynamic approach to life. This is based on the universal force law being electrodynamic. It satisfies the second law of thermodynamics based on non-equilibrium dynamics. It allows growth of an organism from a single cell and aging to occur simultaneously. Longitudinal vibrations of molecular fibers and organic molecules is the pulse of life. The frequencies and rhythms of longitudinal vibrations control various life processes in animals and plants. So here we see, I think most of us, when we were doing physics, we're not biologists, we're not medical doctors, but if the approach we're using is universal in nature, then we'll have to eventually get to these other areas. And so I've been working on this for 40 years, almost 50 years, and my wife was terminally ill with cancer at one point, and I found the foods that have the most longitudinal energy and fed her that, and she got well. And we were at Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C., and when I went in for an appointment after she had recovered, it took her about 30 days to recover from her terminal case of cancer. And the doctor said, we don't understand how you could be well in just 30 days. Is there something you did? And I told them about eating these foods, fresh fruits and vegetables that had a lot of life energy. And he said, that's against the law. The Food and Drug Administration does not recognize that as a therapy, and it's illegal to use an unrecognized therapy. And I have to report you to the Food and Drug Administration, and you can never return to this hospital for any treatment whatsoever. You're in an automobile accident and they bring you in an ambulance to the emergency room, we will reject you because you have used an illegal therapy of fresh fruits and vegetables. And by the way, you know who told us about this? The Amish. The Amish have been using this therapy for cancer and many other diseases for hundreds of years. And they don't tell it, they don't advertise it, they don't publish it, but they use it. And they know how to get well from a lot of these things, which the rest of our society doesn't know. Anyway, they went up to Pennsylvania. We went to a place called Mannheim, Pennsylvania, to the retreat house, which was the name of the place where they did this. They taught you how to do it. My wife went there for 9 days, and they put her on a fast for 2 days, and then they trained her to do a fresh fruit and vegetable breakfast, a fresh fruit and vegetable lunch, and a fresh fruit and vegetable dinner for 7 days. And we did 7 different breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. And that's all she ate while she was there. And then they said, go home and continue doing the same thing. Go to an Amish market and get your fruits and vegetables, the same ones you see here, and eat them, and you'll be well within a month. And sure enough, you were. And but not only did they report my wife to the Food and Drug Administration for using this origin of electrodynamic longitudinal vibration energy in plants, fruits and vegetables, but they said you cannot go to any doctor in any of the 50 states of the United States and have any thing done related to cancer because you broke the law and used fresh fruits and vegetables. And the after 6 months, my wife was anxious that maybe the cancer might be returning, although we were still on the diet of fresh fruits and vegetables. And so we lived in Maryland. We had gone to this hospital in D.C. We went over to Virginia, to Leesburg, to another hospital there, and had them do some tests to see if the cancer had returned. And they found that it had not. But unknown to us, within 24 hours, that doctor who did the tests was taken to court, and his license to practice medicine was revoked by the Food and Drug Administration. And that man was upset. He thought that was just the wrong thing to do in your society. Everybody has to eat some fresh fruits and vegetables to take someone's license to practice medicine away because he saw a patient who was using fresh fruits and vegetables to combat cancer. That didn't make any sense. And so he appealed to the Virginia Supreme Court and lost. And then he appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court and lost because the Food and Drug Administration had the authority to do that. It had been given to them by Congress. But the Food and Drug Administration is financed by the pharmaceutical and agricultural industries, not by taxes to like other forms of government. So they always make decisions in their favor. And anyway, there was a flurry of activity in Congress to reduce the power of the Food and Drug Administration because the American public, when they read about this in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all these major newspapers around the country, they felt it was wrong. And but it turns out that the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry contributes more money to congressional campaigns than any other party in the country. And so they told them, if you take up this, we won't support you anymore. You will never be reelected to Congress. And so they refused to act on it. But 13 states passed a state law legalizing the eating of fresh fruits and vegetables for any medical purpose whatsoever. And those states were New York, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Texas, California. But only 13 states. So my wife has to make sure she doesn't go into D.C. or Virginia to a hospital, because if she goes there, the doctor that sees her will lose his license to practice medicine, and they monitor your medical insurance. And whenever something is given, they can tell if you have done it in a state where it's illegal to use fresh fruits and vegetables. So anyway, that's some of my personal history, my wife's history, and you get to see this longitudinal vibration and how it comes from plants. You can get it out of plants, and they get theirs, believe it or not, from things like the sun. And so that's how they get their life energy. Okay, I think I've done enough. Now we can have some discussion.
All right, thanks, Bill. So that's very interesting about your personal story and what you think's going on. Although I guess in the beginning of our little discussion here, you're saying that even some of your current relatives are having some medical issues.
Yes.
And I was wondering, are you working on applying some of the things that you've learned to try and solve their problems?
Yes, and let me tell you what's happening. See, in Virginia, it's not legal to use this. In Maryland, you can now. And D.C. is still illegal. But my father got cancer when he was 68. And my wife had already gone through this procedure. He knew about it. But his doctors told him, don't you touch that. We are the experts, not your son, not your daughter-in-law. You do what we tell you. And he died. He went up to a very famous hospital in New York and had part of his intestines taken out and part of his lungs taken out by surgery. And then when he came home, he got pneumonia and died. And and my sister is a medical doctor in Kansas City, and she won't touch it. And my daughter got medical degrees, and she works at Johns Hopkins University Hospital, and she doesn't want to touch it either because it's the end of your career, as you do. But you need to know there's a lot of politics in medicine, and that what works. Like President Reich was terminally ill with cancer, and his wife took him to Germany, and they used similar procedure and cured him of his cancer. And he came back to the United States. He knew he would cause all kinds of problems as president if he went to an American doctor to get that type of a treatment, and the American doctors didn't offer it. And so anyway, that's a little bit of history there. Yeah, but yeah, I have given away. I used to be a deacon in a very large church, a mega church here in the Washington area, and I did a lot of visitation, people in the hospital and that sort of thing, and I told them about my wife's experience, and she talked to them, and we gave them all kinds of literature and information and stuff like that, but their doctors talked them out of it. And so they don't end up doing it. Now, after giving out thousands of pieces of material and paying for it, I decided that if they weren't interested, if they weren't going to follow it, I was going to stop doing this procedure of giving it away.
So, Pal, you had a question?
Yes, I would like to. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, I have actually more than one question, and I was wondering, would you prefer that I ask one at a time or all of them together?
Oh, well, do them one at a time.
One at a time is easier.
Yeah.
Okay. My first question is that you're very overwhelming. It's hard to get a handle on how to proceed. So my first question to you is there a strategy or a priority that you would recommend someone in order to learn the kinds of the things you have learned in your life that are so complex, and yet you have done so well?
One of the things I have discovered over the years, particularly after the internet came into existence, is that some medical doctors in the world are using this.
Yes.
And they're in a country or a place so they can do it legally. They're not opposed like by the Food and Drug Administration. And they put out newsletters and they give all kinds of studies that have been done with this type of techniques, electrical techniques and getting certain types of foods, natural substances and plants to help people out. But see, what got me on it was once I had eliminated 3 of the 4 force laws in nature, we didn't know of any other force. So I thought electrical should be involved in everything. And so that was an interesting conclusion. And there's many areas you can look at. For instance, suppose I want a source of energy other than fossil fuels. Well, is there a way to capture some electrical energy in some way? And the answer is yes. And there's a company right now in Silicon Valley that has made a new nanotech crystal that can replace solar panels. And the crystal is 100 times as much energy per second per square inch as a regular solar panel. And it works 24 hours a day, not just when the sun is there. And that company is accepting. If you want to use this technology in your industry, you give them $1 billion, and they will let you use it in your industry. Tesla gave them $1 billion to use it in their cars. They will no longer have batteries. They've already made one car so that people can see it. And they demonstrated it. And as a result of that, all the car manufacturers, major car manufacturers in the world, have put up the $1 billion. In the European Union, they've already passed 2 laws. One law says you cannot sell gasoline or fuel oil powered cars past the year 2030. And you cannot sell gasoline or fuel oil past the year 2040. Everything will have to be based on these crystals. And so that's amazing. And when Tesla demonstrated it, they took their car to a racetrack and they went from 0 to 400 miles per hour in 6 seconds using this crystal as a source of energy. No other car can do that. But not only can you power that, you can power your whole house. Amazon put up the $1 billion. Apple put up the $1 billion. They're putting these crystals in things they make and sell, like cell phones. You will no longer have to recharge your cell phone. It'll last a lifetime. And the G5s that are coming out, they will have this in it. And so anyway, that's going on. And in the first year that this company in Silicon Valley offered to let these companies have the access and use of this crystal, they received $1 billion from 1,250 companies. That means they were convinced that this is the technology of the future. And this type of energy they're getting is coming from hydrogen and helium throughout the universe in the extreme ultraviolet. The extreme ultraviolet is so much higher energy than the solar energy we see that the solar panels use. We can't even see the extreme ultraviolet with our eyes. You have to have some special device to detect it. But that's what I think this solar crystal is using. So that's the answer to the first question. So we go to the next one.
Okay.
If you wanted more background, I'd highly recommend Becker's book, as you've mentioned. There's also a book which I like called Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis by James Oshman, which I found very good, has a lot of references. So that's just general background, I think, that might be relevant to what you presented.
I have his, at least the volume 1 of the Universal Force book that you had published.
Yeah.
But didn't follow through the other ones because even the first volume was very time-consuming to get a handle on. But my question number 2 is regarding your arrangement with your son. I'm not sure if you work together on all the projects, and if so, are they mutually reciprocal, that you help each other and work on both kinds, or do you have a separate magisteria, as they say, father's magisteria and son's magisteria?
Well, to tell you the truth, my sons and my daughter only worked with me in science because they went to a school where they had to have a science fair project.
Right.
In high school. And my oldest son, when he went to the regional science fair, he got a first place at his high school. He went to Science and Tech High School. When he went to the regional science fair, they said this project's not politically correct in science, so we won't judge it. And the school superintendents for the counties involved did not want that to get out, that the judges refused to judge the project on its own merits. And they gave him a big trophy, but he didn't get to go to the International Science Fair or anything like that. But they wanted to cover up the fact that they did such things, because it was the first time in the Washington area it had ever happened. And then my second son, he got first place at the regional science fair, and he went to the International Science Fair, where all the judges are Nobel Prize winners, and they refused to judge his project on the theory of the atom, which would explain where the source of the extreme ultraviolet radiation and all that kind of stuff was, because it invalidated their theories for their Nobel Prize.
Comical.
But NASA, who measured the extreme ultraviolet data for the hydrogen and helium out in space, and my son was able to predict every single line of the hundreds that they measured, they said, this is not right. And they gave my son the grand prize at the International Science Fair, which enabled him to go to college for free. And but he hasn't continued that because the political tug of war that's going on is so bad that he realized he would never be able to support his wife and family if he was pursuing that. And I had to support myself in the computer field because I got blackballed for doing it in the scientific community. So that's the answer. They're not working on that right now.
Sounds like father, like son. Anyway, my third question is does everything that you have done or know about or anyone has done fall under the label of what you might call universal force law, or are there some things beyond the universal force law or laws?
Yeah, I'll answer that question. There's 4 volumes in the Universal Force.
I know.
And I've only finished, well, I actually haven't finished. I'm on the 8th version of the first volume, and it hasn't been published yet, but it's got...
Well, I don't have the 8th version.
No, I know.
I still have the first one.
I just, it's cheaper just to revise it and not tell you.
Yeah.
Because if you, I don't have to pay for all the publication costs and everything again, but I will come out with the second edition of the book in the near future when I complete some of the work I'm doing on the quantization of gravity. But the second volume is on the theory of elementary particles, and I predict more of the elementary particle data than any previous theory. And I have published it in various international scientific organizations, papers. But I haven't finished all of the work I like to do. I'm doing a lot of historical work, trying to show that the theory of matter, of elementary particles that I'm currently promoting, was originated by Moses, and it was promoted through the Greeks and the Iranian Indian James. They wrote about what he did, and that's how we find out, because we don't have anything like that in the Bible. But then so the other thing is, there's a relationship between this work in electrodynamics and the Bible. And the relationship is, in the Bible, if you do the translation yourself from the Hebrew and the Greek to English, and you use the regular method of scientific translation, which is called the root word method, you will discover that the means by which God created and maintains or sustains the universe is all electromagnetic. You can see in the Old Testament all the electromagnetic things, like Moses goes up to the burning bush, but it's not on fire. When they build the tabernacle, there's a fire that comes down from the sky over the tabernacle that provides a light by night, and it's all electromagnetic. And you discover all this electromagnetic things when people become Christians in the New Testament, and we have pictures of them with like a flame of fire above their head. That which they saw, something like that, that is electromagnetic type phenomenon. So what you see is that the electromagnetic field apparently emanates from God. That's the source. And then when he disturbs it, that makes all the forms of matter. And the strength of the soliton is very strong, so it can last for the age of the universe. Doesn't necessarily always do it, because if it meets an anti-soliton, they'll disintegrate. But so anyway, that shows that there's a religious compatibility to this approach, and it also shows that it seems to be able to explain all the phenomena in science. Now, the third volume of this series is on the atom and the nucleus, and I've already published many papers there. And the fourth volume is on molecules and the origin of life. And so those, and I have a little bit, I've written papers on some of this, like this presentation I just showed today was the first of 6 one-hour presentations that I've been giving around the world on electrodynamics, nature of life. I haven't shown all the experiments that we've done and that sort of thing. I didn't have time to do that, but I have 5 more of these 1-hour presentations in that series. And I was invited by the Jewish people in Israel to come and speak to them, because they put a lot of stock and they have a lot of investments in the medical field. And they have a lot of people who are injured, and they would like to be able to help them recover from all this that's going on in the Middle East. So, yeah.
I just hope I don't go broke learning about your stuff alone.
Oh, well, I don't think you know, I'm like you. I'm kind of amateurish. I don't know everything, and you have to be honest with yourself. So, people point out things like when I first published the book on the universal force, a fellow in this organization came up to me and said, "You're not doing it right. You should follow the work of Isaac Newton and his mathematical principles of natural philosophy, and you'll get a better theory." And so I had that book in my library, but I never read it that closely. So I read it, and I figured out what he was saying, and I agreed with him. And I gave him credit in the front of the book on all editions after that edition for having told me about that. And I was able to expand the work I was doing quite a bit just because of that. And so we need to always keep humble, because if you're too proud of yourself, you'll make a mistake and you'll say the wrong thing. And so anyway, that's what I do. And as you get older too, your mental processes are not as good as they were when you were younger, and so I'm working on that. To see if there's something I can
Finally, I want to thank you and commend you for what you have done, and you are an inspiration to a lot of people, not just your family or the ones you come in contact with. I think people get to know a little bit about your writings and papers and conferences that they can't stop wondering like I wonder. And I'm always in your awe for all these many years. In fact, if I recall correctly, the very first presentation that I saw yours had nothing to do with science. It had something to do with the Bible and religion and stuff like that.
Yes. I've been active in both fields. I've been trying to keep them separate, but there's a crossover that's now occurring.
Yeah, it's good, because you would expect that there would be a crossover, because ultimately, God is one.
Yeah.
And there can't be anything there in the universe of which God is not in charge. And therefore, ultimately, one is a very easy thing for me to grasp. So I'll let you go. You have been very kind and generous.
Okay, other questions people had? I think some other people were.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can see if there's raised.
Yes, thank you, Pal, for your questions. Is there anyone else who'd like to ask Bill Lucas about this topic? You can speak up. Now, for me, myself, I find it interesting, this whole concept of life energy. But I would probably disagree with the characterization of it maybe being a longitudinal wave. I can understand biologically that any wave that you might encounter in biological materials would probably be longitudinal, because basically most waves, like sound waves, are clearly longitudinal. And anytime you hit something, it's going to be a compression rarefaction wave in the direction of the wave travel. But I'm kind of skeptical about whether the wave that's coming out of the radar unit is actually of an actual different characteristic. You mentioned transverse versus longitudinal. And I'm thinking that if it came out of a radar arrangement, then probably what you're looking at is a certain frequency or a pattern that can be generated by radar magnetron, like what we have in our microwave ovens. So I would think that, and I would like to see some more research as to whether it's a particular frequency rather than the shape of the wave. So I don't think that it may necessarily have to do with, say, transverse or longitudinal, since I actually don't believe that any wave other than an earthquake wave actually travels in a transverse fashion. Like you had your one slide there showing the transverse and what particles look like when they're doing transverse motion, and what they would look like in longitudinal motion. So, but that would be kind of my comment on that. I mean, this may be just a term of more of a definitional, because I don't think anybody really experimentally can say what that wave format is, considering we don't know what it's waving in. We would have to be able to know what that is and track each of those particles in order to make a picture like you had, which showed clearly the difference between transverse and a longitudinal wave. But I think there is something about this life energy, that there's something in organic living material that does not exist in like lifeless plastic or whatever you might have. Does anyone else have any other comments they want to make about that? Surely Bill has mentioned a lot of fantastic sounding things in his presentation, especially about the $1 billion paid for this crystal thing. I would think that we would have heard something about that in the mainstream by now, but we haven't. So I was wondering, Bill, how can you explain that we haven't seen this announced in the major media outlets or
well,
things?
I get newsletters related to investments in the stock market, and it's in those. And it's very disruptive to our society, because if you think about it, are we going to need power plants in the future? No. Are we going to need electric lines in the future? No. Are we going to need cables coming to our house in the future? No. All of this, and all this stuff has been approved through the United Nations. There's a man in Japan who's putting up between 2,000 and 3,000 low-level satellites. And these satellites are going to provide cell phone service, internet access, and TV access for everyone on the planet Earth. And he's going to charge $7 a month for everything. So that, all the, like in my area where I live, the cable companies have already sold their company to someone who doesn't know this. And so I had a company called Comcast, and they sold everything they owned in the Washington area to another organization, and got their money out before everybody figured out what was going on. And this fella Elon Musk, who puts up satellites, he is putting up the 3,000 or 2,000 to 3,000 satellites for this Japanese man, and he uses the same rockets over and over again. So it's trying to keep the cost down, and they have a way of moving the satellite up higher as it loses energy, because it's interacting with the atmosphere, and so they don't have to keep replacing them. They have found a way to power them and move them with basically converting electrical power to momentum of some sort, or inertia. And so we've talked some about that sort of thing in our organization. and they're using that. And so there's a lot going on, and if someone like the Iranians make a nuclear bomb and put it up in the right place and blow it up, they could really disturb our society. Because once we get dependent on all this technology, we won't have anything to back it up. So it's dangerous. So I don't know how it's all going to work out.
Well, I'm just thinking that if Apple were anywhere close to having a batteryless iPhone, that would have most certainly heard about that. And I just haven't heard anything like that. All I hear about, I was just reading my recent, iPhone news, and it's all about, well, your battery's going to die after 500 recharges, and no, they don't no longer provide a $29 battery replacement, and stuff like that, and how they're improving their battery management, but nothing about possibly coming up with an iPhone that doesn't need a battery, which I think would be great. But
well, I get this information, as I say, from people who are telling you where to invest your money in the stock market.
Yeah, but those people, I mean, like I said, I get those same things, and they're basically a bunch of liars, really. They'll take something, because I have read about the crystal. Now, I know that's based on the piezoelectric principle, and that's the same thing that I can get a lighter from the dollar store, you click it, and it creates a spark, because it's, and it does generate quite a bit of power just from you clicking that switch hits a crystal, generates several hundred volts worth of electricity to create the spark needed to light the lighter. But certainly that principle works, but that's a far cry from being able to just pull out energy from the ultraviolet range. I mean, that in principle that could work, right? You have because that energy probably exists all the time, so I would agree with you there. And I always figured that, there may be some way of harnessing all that ambient energy, like a solar cell. If you got a solar cell that could, use just, say, the cosmic background radiation or any other kind of radiation, could be this high ultraviolet radiation, or some radiation that can penetrate walls and doesn't need direct exposure. I could believe that. And it's like these the stock market, brochures. They kind of take advantage of that, and they can say really anything like that. I mean, it would be very fantastic if about $12,000 billion had been invested in this company. I think that would be hard to believe. Now, a little stock market brochure can say whatever they want, and I could say that, but I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm just saying that I'm a bit skeptical, because I think that if something that major was coming up, probably all the power and oil companies would probably hire the mafia, like the other guy you were mentioning, and just destroy them utterly before they could ever get off the ground. So,
yeah. Well, interestingly, the oil companies are selling off their stuff too, and a lot of Americans who are very wealthy own a lot of oil stock, and they're selling it like crazy and trying to get their money out before they lose it. And Saudi Arabia is the one country that is going to benefit from this, because this crystal requires a certain amount of sand of a certain type, and they have that in their country. And so instead of selling the oil, they're going to actually make more money selling the sand. So it's kind of interesting to what's going on. But I would like to get some of these crystals just to power my own house and become independent of power companies and not have to buy gasoline for my car and all that kind of stuff, But it hasn't happened yet. To the point.
Yeah, that's the problem. All these things are always 5 years in the making, right? Because oftentimes you'll look at these websites and they'll say, we'll have this in 5 years, and the website was created in 2012, and now it's 2019, and the website has not been updated,
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, where's my flying car or my energy device? I'm just saying that a lot of these things just don't wash out. It's very easy to like I said, come up with a little bit of science that seemed a little bit believable, and then get poor investors to invest in this thing because it sounds so fantastic when they really have nothing. So that's why I once again remain very skeptical about announcements like that. And as scientists, we need to be careful about stuff like that, I think. I would be more skeptical, I would say.
I have bought a lot of these things have been advertised to do special things like that, and I've been disappointed, as you said, with most of them. They don't really do much. The only thing I've gotten that I find helpful is for the electricity in my house. I have a thing that's called an energy balancer, and you put it on your service panel, and the power that you pay for that goes through the meter is proportional to the total resistance or impedance of the circuitry of the whole house. And this device, that impedance is the square root of the true resistance, R squared, plus the difference between the inductance and capacitance of the circuit squared. And so this device, what it does is it changes the inductance and capacitance of the total circuitry of your house on the fly so that term goes to zero, so that you only pay for the power that's in effect due to the pure resistance of your circuitry. And so that works. I mean, my electric bill is $50 to $100 a month less as a result of using that device. And they sell that. They make it in China. Most European homes have it, but in America, not nearly as many use it as in Europe.
Yeah, I've heard about those power factor converters, although I didn't think it could save you that much money.
Well, it depends on what you've got. For instance, I use fluorescent lights, and it saves 35% on your electric bill for using fluorescent lights. And then it saves you, if you have a motor, it will save you money on all systems that are motor driven. So I have heat pumps, I have refrigerator, washer, dryer, washing machine, and many things in the house that I save money on. But I don't save, 100%. And it's about between 30 and 50% is what I can say. And, and also, some devices last longer when you use that, the electrical devices, because when they're out of balance, they tend to deteriorate faster.
But getting back to your original topic,
yes,
I would totally agree that pretty much everything has an electric component to it. Because I think that would be fairly obvious in that every single particle that we know about has a charge, and everything that we know about has electrons in it. And we know that anything has electrons in it, anything that time that moves, that's electricity. So in that way, it's kind of a pretty obvious that all organic processes, actually all chemical processes, really are electrical in nature. Although I'm not sure what the relevance of showing up, like say what the acupressure points are on your feet. That's very interesting and may be true. But I guess you might be saying that there's like some wiring or something that's electrical in nature that determines that. So I would agree with that, but I guess based on the topic name, though, that you're saying that life itself is of electrodynamic nature, which I would say is true, but in a trivial way. that because all chemical reactions are of electrodynamic nature, do you have to think that that goes further than that? That it's more than just trivial chemical?
Well, I don't think that you can create life chemically, and I don't think that using a longitudinal light source that you can create life where there is no life. In other words, you can enhance and energize the life, but you cannot create it from scratch. So so we don't have all the capabilities that we would like, and that's as far as I can tell, the situation. But I've been very pleased at the work I've done in the work on elementary particles. I can explain in terms of solitons all of the confirmed elementary particles. There's about 96 of them, and I can predict all of their properties from scratch, from electrodynamics. I can predict their mass. I can predict all their decays, modes. I can predict how you can make them in an accelerator and that kind of thing. And as far as I know, the standard model cannot do that. It can only do part of that. And the standard model and other models, like string theory and that sort of thing, they all have problems and assumptions that are questionable. And I don't have any of that in electrodynamics. I just have the empirical laws of electrodynamics. And so that seems very promising. And so being able to do the theory of elementary particles and the theory of the atom that predicts all the data that we're now able to measure with improved experiment capability, I think that is very significant progress. And there are people who are fighting it. And I'm not sure always why they're fighting it, but some people say it has religious connotations, and I don't know about that. I didn't live during the time of what's called the first and second great spiritual awakening in America and in Europe, and I don't know what people did, but they claim that there are groups that are just opposed to everything that could support a religious interpretation of something, and so they try to defeat it in every way they can.
All right. Well,
you know how people are giving the president a hard time in our day, and people being appointed to chief Supreme Court justices and stuff like that, and they just go out of their way to try and discredit them and to get someone else of their persuasion in those positions.
All right. Well, it looks like we're getting to the end of our discussion today. So thank you, Bill, for bringing us your presentation on the electrodynamic nature of life. I mean, I'm most interested in this idea that there's something different in the electrodynamic world, like you say, which corresponds to this life energy, which can be measured, which is some special form of electromagnetic radiation. So I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it seems like something like that exists and could be helpful in keeping ourselves healthy. I think that's probably the part that's non-trivial about what the electrodynamic nature of life, that it has this electrodynamic wave of some sort. I said I'm not convinced it's longitudinal. You could call it that, but you could just call it Orgone wave just as easily, and might be a more accurate description since we don't know exactly what its nature is.
Well, when you make a detector for it, you have to. The detector we make works on a capacitor. Without a capacitor, you cannot make a meter that measures longitudinal wave. And
well, it has something to do with capacitance.
Yeah, and capacitance was one of the terms that was thrown out of electrodynamics by Oliver Heaviside when he took over from Maxwell. And the question is, why did he throw away two of the empirical equations of electrodynamics and not use them? And why did he introduce these assumptions to get rid of more terms instead of going with the empirically measured laws? And they didn't record for us in history, but people like Einstein talked about the hidden secrets of modern science. And he went to these meetings where they were doing this stuff, and he became more aware of what was going on then. But it's not politically correct to reveal that. And so he did.
Well, I think probably here at the CMPS, our purpose is to reveal those secrets.
Yeah.
And we certainly help reveal some of those today. That would just be better if more people would pay attention to what we're doing. Perhaps watch our YouTube videos some more. But I think we've come to the end of the hour. So once again, thanks, Bill, for coming up with presentation. Bill just sent me an email that he'd like to present. I think Aberchecki earlier wanted to present on something. So we may let him present that next week if he would like to come back. I think he wanted to discuss something on the Doppler effect, which might be interesting. But that will do it for this week's episode. Once again, we'll be here every Saturday. And please drop me a line if you would like to have something to discuss. And also, if you can possibly come to our conference, which is coming up on June 26th in Seattle, please consider doing that. But that will do it for now. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.